If you're looking for an all-around, compact, and relatively affordable mid-range zoom for your full frame or even DX Z camera, this could be the lens for you. Now, funny enough, some of my favorite pictures taken with this lens have been of architecture. I've really enjoyed using this lens with my Z5 as a little compact, handheld, no tripod, architecture scouting solution. I've taken some pictures just using available light of museums, and with some basic perspective correction, I've been generally able to get the shots that I wanted. In my opinion, if the lens is good enough to be used for architecture, which is a fairly demanding genre, then it's certainly good enough for walking around, travel, and hiking, which is where I think this lens really shines. You might be asking, why are we even talking about this lens? This lens that was hated even before it was released. Why are we reviewing it, especially when the 40mm f2 is available? But there are certain advantages to having a zoom lens. Here you can see two pictures taken at the extreme ends of this focal range, 24 and 50, standing in the exact same location. You can't always zoom with your feet, especially when you're hiking or traveling, and sometimes you might just want a different focal length. Now, if you're considering this lens, you must also be considering the 24-70 f4. In fact, Nikon has released quite a few of these mid-range zooms that begin at 24mm, and for good reason. A lot of people need this focal range. It's the most used, the most versatile. So among the options, there's probably a lens that's going to work for you. In terms of features, there's really not much to discuss here. It's a compact lens. It only weighs 195 grams or 7 ounces, and it's 51mm long, which makes it absolutely tiny, one of the smallest, lightest lenses you can buy for the Z system. There is no autofocus manual focus switch. There's just one control ring here, right here, behind the focusing ring, which is not as grippy as the focusing ring, which is really excellent. This rubber is really grippy. I mean, you could focus with one finger. This programmable ring here, by default, it's set to manual focus override. So whatever you're focused on, you spin the ring, and then you can manually adjust your focus. I just turned mine off. You can also set this to the usual stuff like exposure compensation, ISO, and you can set your aperture with it. But because it's located so close to the focusing ring, I just turned it off. Here we can see it has a plasticky lens mount, which already might throw some people off. There's not much going on in terms of markings. You just get the focal length indicator here, 24, 28, 35, 40, and 50, which are all the focal lengths you know and love. As usual, we'll be reviewing the pros, the cons, and we'll be looking at plenty of sample pictures along the way. So let's get started. This lens has a minimum focusing distance of just 35 centimeters, or just over a foot, which is excellent if you're on the trail, for example, and you want to take pictures of some flora or some fauna. You can get pretty close to stuff. Here's what the lens looks like on the Nikon Z5. As you can see, it's really well balanced. Part of the reason why I even bothered with mirrorless is for the size and weight savings. And so this lens actually makes a lot of sense. It's not front heavy, even when you zoom in all the way to 50mm. It's still fairly compact, and of course it stows away like this. It's also great as a backup lens. If your primary lenses are much bigger, this could be essentially a very expensive body cap that you just have on the camera just in case. This lens takes 52mm filters, which means you don't have to buy any expensive filters. You probably already have some 52mm filters lying around. It doesn't feel cheap, right? I can't really convey that to you guys over video, but this does not feel like a cheap product. It looks and feels like a high quality product. Well, guys, this lens is sharp, and you're going to be noticing that as a theme no matter how many Z lens reviews you watch, because unless you get a bad sample, and this is why it's always good to test your lens when you first get it, test it at all different apertures and focal lengths, because there's going to be some sample variation, especially with these zooms, but the lens design is fine. I mean, Nikon isn't making any garbage. It's sharp, even wide open at f4, and it's sharp throughout the range, so you don't really have to worry about anything other than the extreme corners, which, to be fair guys, no one actually looks at, really, at the end of the day. No one looks at them. Not your audience, not other experienced photographers. The only people that might look at extreme corners are amateur photographers. They bothered to put in the work to make this thing really resistant to ghosting, flaring, chromatic aberration, none of which I observed. Okay, and I was completely fine using this lens with or without a lens hood. The autofocus is fast and quiet, although I did notice it hunted a bit in low light. Now, I don't want to fault the lens for this because I am using a Z5 and it's not as good in low light focusing as the other Nikon mirrorless cameras. So it could just be my camera, and it is using the latest firmware. But it did hunt a little bit back and forth, especially in low light. Finally, Nikon claims that this lens is dust and moisture resistant. Nevertheless, I wasn't quite comfortable using this lens in rain, and I just put the whole camera and lens combination away. There was never any claim that it was water resistant, only that it's moisture resistant. Aside from the short zoom range, the biggest downside for me, and I don't know why I keep doing this to myself, you can't take the picture until you extend the lens. Okay, and there's a click for when you extend it, so you do get that kind of physical confirmation that it's extended. But then when you want to zoom out to 24, and if you're not careful using gloves or something, you might accidentally retract the lens again, and then you have to extend it again and then zoom out to 24. Anyway, I don't like this mechanism. I understand why it's there. This also makes the lens not that great, in my opinion, for street photography, because even though this looks like a compact setup, as soon as you've extended the lens, it's not that compact anymore, and you might as well be using a bigger lens. So if you're looking to be discreet on the streets, I don't think this is it. The files from this lens were fine. They just took a bit more time to process. I had to do a bit more tweaking and playing around with the sliders to get them where I wanted. I think if you're looking for the best possible images out of the box with no editing, I would go to the 24-70 f4. For me, it wasn't a big issue because I like to play around with the raw files intensely after I shoot. But I'm not going to sit here and lie to you and tell you that this lens is just as good as the 24-70. I mean, shooting this lens after shooting with the 24-70 was a bit underwhelming, kind of like eating a regular burger after you've had a nice tasty ribeye. There's no vibration reduction, okay, no stabilization on this lens, which is fine because all the full frame bodies have it built in. The bokeh is average. Now 6.3 just sounds really bad. I mean, that number, when you look at it, I think if Nikon released a lens that was, I don't know, even 5.9, it would have sold more because that's an odd number, doesn't seem as big. But because it's 6.3, a lot of people are going to be turned off by this lens. With that said, there's nothing really stopping you from treating this lens like a 24mm f4 prime. Okay, so when the light drops, I tend to zoom out back to 24. Finally, and I don't know if this affects all of these lenses because I bought mine white boxed, but mine did not come with a lens hood. I had to buy this generic one on eBay. I think I paid $5 for it. This is not the official Nikon one, but you know what? It works perfectly. It's not the fanciest hood out there, but it certainly does the job. Also, kind of makes it look more professional. So let's take a look at some sample pictures. I really enjoyed hiking with this lens, and I think that's one of the areas it excels. Provided you're not hiking in the rainforest where there's not going to be sufficient light. If you're just doing daytime hiking or walking around, this is a perfect little lens that will not weigh you down. If you're also planning to do portraits, maybe you're hiking, you get to a waterfall and you want to do some portraiture, then yeah, I would bring along a separate prime. All in all, it was sharp. I actually got some images I really like. Now, a couple of the images here, you'll notice a very strange color cast on them. That's not the fault of the lens. That's because I was using a cheap ND filter. Get a quality filter. I think Hoya is a good brand for hobbyists. If I were to price this lens, I would say it's worth about $200 to $250. If the Z mount didn't exist, and if we were back in the days of the F mount, and if Nikon was giving us a lens of this quality, we'd be happy to pay $400 for it. But standards have changed, the playing field has changed, the consumer now just expects a bit more for their money. If you're looking for a small, lightweight lens to use with your Nikon Z camera, I think this could be the lens for you. Don't dismiss it until you've spent some time with it, especially if you're willing to post-process your files. I think you'll find that this lens is a great performer. It's sharp, at all focal lengths and all apertures. It's nice and compact, and aside from this annoying retractable mechanism, I really like this lens. If you have experience with this lens, let us know in the comment section, and as always, thank you for watching, and subscribe for more.